I promise that
Yeah.
this
Sorry,
will.
I was muted. I would
So,
let him in the room and get started, and then if more want to join, Jen or I can admit them.
all good stuff. So I promised this session would be brief. I'm looking forward to retreating to my cooler bedroom with the AC, with the rest of the house hot as hell. Um, Let me try to deal with the question. The last question that I had was on the judiciary, and during our lunch break, um, I learned that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg announced that she is being treated for liver cancer, but says she will continue to do her job on the court. So I think that heightens the judiciary as a really important election issue. And I think particularly for both parties. I think it was certainly there for the Republicans in 16. I think Democrats are acutely attuned to the Supreme Court in 2020. So I see a couple questions, and feel free to post them in the chat, and that's how we'll do our remaining time. How real is Biden's challenge in Texas with demographic changes? Changes were expected in Texas, but is this a 5-alarm fire? Yes, it's a 5-alarm fire. There's no question about it. Democrats have been dreaming about Texas for what seems like decades. And it was always going to be the case that their ability to make challenges statewide. Remember, they haven't won the state in a presidential election since 1976 with Jimmy Carter. The polling shows a very close race in Texas. We don't know if we can believe the polling. But if you look at suburban Texas, that is, if you look at Dallas, Houston, suburban counties, plus the growing Hispanic population in the state, plus youth voting, you saw signs of this in the 2018 Senate race between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. And O'Rourke gave Cruz a real challenge and a real scare. O'Rourke got 48% of the vote, more votes than any Democrat, in total votes, than any Democrat in Texas history. And I think the person that saw that change coming in Texas and wanted it to turn out differently was George W. Bush. Bush got in 2004 44 or 48%. There's a 40 or 44% of the national Hispanic vote. And Bush made a very significant effort as governor to reach out to Hispanic voters in Texas. If we look at the Hispanic vote for president in 16, 12, and 08, that was 26% roughly for the Republicans. So Texas is a 5-alarm fire. And Joe Biden just started to run a COVID ad in Texas saying COVID is tough, but Texans are too. The big thing about Texas is that it's going to force Trump to spend money in a state he shouldn't have to spend money in. And that's also true in Iowa, it's true in Ohio. He was going to have to spend money in Florida. If you look at parties and the Electoral College, think of anchor states. New York, Illinois, California, these are anchor states for the Democrats. No Democratic candidate, Al Gore started this. Al Gore didn't spend a dime in commercials in 2000 in Florida. Those anchor states remain anchor states. For the Republicans, their Electoral College anchor states are Texas and Florida. They must win them. They cannot lose either one of them. And the fact that they're going to have to spend resources in both states now I think particularly for the first time, and there are more congressional gains for the Democrats to come out of Texas. Yeah, I think that's without question. Is Trump trying to use the school opening to woo back suburban mothers? My Lord, let me put on my political hat and being as objective as I possibly can. When it comes to, say, the last month or the last two, Trump is the stupidest politician in the country because, he wants to get a message out about he has a great economy. He's the one that can bring the country back. What does he do? He steps into it on the race issue and muddies his message. And then this notion we're going to force schools to reopen no matter what. This is the thing that suburban mothers, suburban white women in particular, are especially worried about. So they're worried about health care. They're worried about their safety. They're worried about their kids' safety. And all of that is an area that Trump has to at least try to shore up between now and November. And instead, he's not doing that, to be honest with you. I mean, yeah. If Biden wins, does the Tea Party die out, or are they here to stay in the Republican Party? That's a really good question. And of course, the battle is already being joined. If you can Google this, you'll see that Governor Larry Hogan, Republican governor of Maryland, very blue state, and I live in Maryland, he's very popular here, wrote a scathing op-ed in today's Washington Post, blasting Trump and the Trump administration for their response to the pandemic. It was just devastating. And so Hogan, I think, is already setting the stage for a presidential run in 2024. He will be out of office in January of 2023. And so his approach is to move the Republican Party back to the moderate center and away from Trump and Trumpism. This is going to be a huge fight in the Republican Party, and I think if they lose both the presidency, the Senate, and I believe the House is a certainty. In other words, the Democrats are going to maintain their majority in the House, and most political analysts, like Charlie Cook and others, believe that to be the case. There just isn't. Both the candidate recruitment has suffered on the Republican side and the fundraising has suffered. So it's going to take a lot for them to be a majority in 2021. I think it takes time for the party to figure all this out. And it took the Republicans time to figure out the New Deal. It took the Democrats plenty of time, 3 elections, to figure out they got a party problem. Our candidates aren't just lousy candidates. We've got a party problem. So I think it is going to take time. It's going to be a big fight in the Republican Party should that happen. If Trump wins, there's no fight. It just becomes more and more and more the what traditional conservatives see as a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. What about the news about sidelining the COVID numbers to HHS and not the CDC? Is this a political move? Well, there's a lot of skepticism about it because it reflects a lack of trust in the president and his administration. So one of the Trump has weaknesses in the polling on character and also on trust questions. And I think that, that may well be. Let's assume it's true for a moment, for the sake of argument. People realize there's a pandemic. They realize that people are getting sick and dying. There's obviously a group of Americans and Trump supporters that are are basically saying we're not going to wear masks, et cetera. It's amazing that this has become a political argument. But like everything else, as it hits closer and closer and closer to home, um, whatever you do regarding the numbers, it's going to matter for people. What are they going to be thinking about when they cast the ballot? And we just got New York primary results weeks after the primary. We may not know for weeks after November 3rd how this is going to turn out. Don't think that this is going to be like any other election. So, the reality matters to people. So not being a professional, here's another question. What about not being a professional politician? Is both the best thing because it allowed Trump to win in 2016 and the worst thing because it could be his demise in 2020? Absolutely. If you look at when we change presidents, we always want the opposite of what that president was. Hoover to Roosevelt. If we look at Carter to Reagan, if we look at, and this is George W. Bush to Obama, right? There's a great analogy, I didn't make it up, that Obama was Mr. Spock of Star Trek, cerebral, cool, right? And Donald Trump is Captain Kirk, emotional. It may well be that if we're changing presidents in 2020, if you think about the qualities that one would associate with Donald Trump, impulsive, not an experienced politician outside of politics, etc., then it could well be that Joe Biden is the opposite of that, and that would point to a shift in not just the party control of the presidency, but the personal qualities, and they do matter a great deal. Trump was able to say, what have you got to lose in 2016? I'm not from government, but I'm a very successful businessman, and these politicians are idiots. And it may well be that people decide in 2020 that experience in running a government and handling the pandemic are going to be most important to them. How many dollars and time are the parties spending on state legislative races, since they will be largely in charge of gerrymandering districts post-census? This is another reason why 2020 is such a big election, because party control of the states, and Brad had pointed this out earlier, state legislatures and state governorships is really going to matter. The beauty of this for the Republicans in 2010 were the enormous gains that they made, not just in the Congress at the federal level, but also at the state legislative level. More than 1,000 seats transferred party hands at the state legislative level during the Obama presidency from Democrat to Republican. That really matters, not just for the census, but for candidate recruitment and going up the ladder. Remember, Barack Obama had been a state senator. So the Republicans have invested a lot. Part of their national strategy is that they do have, of course, the Governors Association, which both parties have, and organizations devoted to state legislatures. And Democrats have caught up with that, and they understand that control of the state legislature, the governorship, absolutely matters. And if 2020 is a GOP route, that has very long-term implications. And there's a group within the Democratic Party headed by former Attorney General Eric Holder with the support from Barack Obama called All on the Line, that basically says we want to make sure that legislative districts are drawn legitimately and not to skewer one party or the other. Some state courts have looked at the state constitutions, like Pennsylvania, and said these congressional districts violate our state constitution and need to be redrawn. And that did happen in 2018, and it had enormous consequences for the Republican Party in Pennsylvania. What are the first actions of a Biden presidency? Watch the convention, which, by the way, is all virtual, and the conventions are going to change dramatically. The Democrats have known for a long time that their convention is going to be virtual, and the Republicans are just coming to that realization. What the Democrats did was they hired a producer of the Tony Awards and the Super Bowl halftime show to produce their convention. So it's not going to be 4 nights of speeches. But I would say this, that I think that and this is a guess, watch the Biden acceptance speech, because I think that they recognize that first they recognize getting control of the Senate is absolutely vital, and they know that. Therefore, they're looking at what are those first 100 days, what legislation are we going to move, and what can Biden do through executive order. Once Biden receives the nomination under federal law, he gets federal dollars to begin a transition. And this was done years ago because we realized that there isn't a lot of time between November to January. They've already begun to plan the transition in the Biden campaign in a very quiet way, but they understand how important that work is. I think I'm going to go out on a limb, and I think that he will announce in the convention speech a legislative agenda, and for the first 100 days, which will be the expansion of Obamacare with a public option. There will also be executive orders that he will sign. And if I had, and one of them is going to be the mobilization under the Defense Production Act. That is the mobilization of industry to produce PPE and also the vials and equipment you need for a vaccine, which is going to be very significant. I also will be bold enough to suggest that he might announce at the convention that he would take the oath in the Capitol, forego the parade, the big ceremony, the inaugural balls, and say that day one is a work day, and go from the Capitol to the White House and start signing executive orders. Just to guess. I'm looking to see if there are other, but they realize that governing really matters here. Okay. Make sure I see. I don't see another question. Okay. Well, I promised this wouldn't go on long, and it hasn't, but I hope I answered your question. If I were to come back where I started today, I think 2020 is a very big deal. I think Americans see it that way in terms of their engagement. I don't think that they believe, nor do I believe, that this is a run-of-the-mill election. I think the potential for chaos after the election is very high. Simply because so many people will vote by mail, and the states are unprepared to handle that. Yeah, and voter suppression. So voter suppression really is going to matter here. there was a very good thing, I think it was out on Political Wire. If not, it was at First Read this morning, where if you look at the primary season, we had thousands of ballots that were invalidated in the primaries, either because they arrived too late, or there were problems with the signature, or about one voter said in this article that her ballot was torn at one corner, and she used Scotch tape to put it together, and her ballot was not counted. So I think we're going to see a lot of that happen. But the engagement in the election is just going to be, very, very, very high. Here's another one. How are political scientists preparing for changes in the presidency? There have been talk of things as extreme as civil war, and we are polarized, or is that just social media and mainstream media hysteria, and will it go as usual? We are in a very polarized position in this country, without question. I think without question. And one of the, here's what I would say. And I did write about this in the newspaper, The Hill. If you had had a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren as the Democratic nominee, and if they had won, so let's assume these ifs for the moment, I think that the Republican Party, given that scenario, would go into immediate opposition with the Democrats. That makes it a little less problematic here with Biden. The Trump campaign wanted to run against Sanders or Warren, and wanted to run against socialism. And the idea would be that Warren and Sanders would be very scary figures for the voters. That's a very hard race to run against Biden, I think. So I do think that there'll be a period of reflection. And Biden has premised part of his candidacy on the idea that he can work with Republicans, that there's nothing to be frightened of with him. I don't think that voters in general are frightened of Joe Biden. The Trump campaign will be succeeding if they change that perception, which they are trying very hard to do, by the way. But if we can't seem to come together as a country, maybe we're done. But right now, the two universes are just sharp, and I just don't know. Again, I think a lot of this is going to depend on what the losing party does. What would a lame duck Trump presidency look like? Well, I think we'll see even more pardons, which is a sole presidential power. I think that we'll try to see Trump do more and more on his own in the period between November and January. If he, of course, is saying vote by mail is very fraudulent and so forth, he may be being very clever in doing that, as opposed to what a lot of Republicans think, because they have vested historically in states like Florida in vote by mail. And they've done very well in states like Florida with vote by mail. If Trump is ahead on election day in key states because his voters went personally to the polls and voted, and then those votes those margins are being cut into, eroded, and overturned by counting of absentee ballots and vote by mail, he could say that the election is rigged, and they're stealing it right from me. And it could get very, very, very bitter. If he's defeated decisively, then I think he will use his remaining powers and deal with the Paul Manaforts of the world and the Michael Flynns and so on. He'll certainly try to use whatever unilateral authority he has, without question. Okay, I think I've seen everything. Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate all the kind comments, and I certainly hope this has been helpful.
All right. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Gene. I'm going to go cool off.
No, please do that. And teachers, just so you know, I saw while John was talking, Jen sent an email out about your certificates. So if you need them for your school districts to get your continuing ed credits and that sort of stuff, it should be there. But thank you again, John. Thank you, Jen. And everybody take care. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.